Welcome, everyone, to What the Force, and welcome to a new episode of The Power of Myth and Symbolism in Star Wars. It's been a moment.
It has been a moment.
Welcome, Ty Black.
I totally forgot this was a PMS episode, if you will. I totally forgot it was, but of course it is. It's been a while, so yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while. But with the release of the Jedi Temple Challenge, which is available on Star Wars Kids YouTube, we thought it would be a good time to talk about Trials.
Trials, yeah. Actually, this is one that you have been wanting to do for a pretty long time, I think. We've always
been on my list.
It's been on your list, but it's also been one where we're like, we kept accumulating topic ideas for this particular one, like different things we could talk about, and now we have more than enough to talk about, especially with the new show, I think.
Yeah, and I do want to do a brief chat about the new show as well, and just kind of a fun into what it is. It's really cute, honestly.
Yeah, it's really cute. Yeah.
It's so cute. But before we get into that, I did want to say what our thesis was, and that I think it's really important that from a story perspective, Trials should reflect the socio-political and thematic challenges that are in the character's universe. And because if they are able to overcome it, they are able to, bring the true elixir back to the community. That's the point, right, of going through the trials, is learning things and developing that elixir so that you can truthfully come back to the community and say, hey, this is how we fix the problems of the day.
Yeah.
And it's not just about leveling up.
No, it's not. Yeah, and this is something when I heard about the show coming out, I got a little nervous about what the content was going to be like. I was kind of pleasantly surprised, but also, it's got its little problems here and there. It's got some flaws, but what do you expect? It's a show on YouTube. But yeah, so this particular topic is really interesting, taking into consideration Mando and Clone Wars, and all of these things seem to deal with the themes a little differently, dealing with Trials a little differently from each other, especially when you go back into Legends and you look at what the new films did. And so this is going to be kind of an interesting one to dissect, I think.
Yes. And so I don't know that we know exactly when it happens. Somebody messaged Ahmed Best and said, when does this happen in canon? I need to know. And he's like, I don't care. Because I mean, that's not really the point. The point is to give kids a chance to feel like they're becoming Jedi and, facing challenges. And it's a reality TV show. Literally, the point is to earn a lightsaber.
Yeah.
That's the point. I
think one group of them at some point, they were in the second episode, the ones that lost, they were like, oh, I really wanted the lightsaber and I really wanted the cloak, but it's okay. I had a good time, I'm just like, this show is precious. It's absolutely precious. The only other show I've watched that features kids, that sort of reality show kind of thing is MasterChef Junior. Mm-hmm. And I cannot watch that show without crying because these kids, you have such, passion for these things. Mm-hmm. It's called Jedi Temple Challenge, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Making sure. That one is, it kind of does the same thing to me. It kind of brings tears to my eyes to see these kids be so serious about this game and being in this kind of immersive, reality that they're in. The setting that they put them in is really, really well done. They really did a good job. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's very beautiful. It's very realistic. It has to be fun being there and playing the games. So I thought that was really cool. But
it very much feels like a weird mix of American Gladiator and, a puzzle game. And I love the trivia. The trivia part was actually my personal favorite of the games, because it has this little story, which is different every time.
Yes.
And then the kids have to remember different aspects of it. So it's like they didn't need to have any out of game experience or knowledge. It was all presented to them in the trial of the knowledge piece, which was really cool.
Yeah.
And it's like, how good are you at memorizing facts, though?
That was something that I was like, okay, I get it. So on one side of the, coin, you could say, oh, this is a whole other, this is more of the, trivia, like Star Wars trivia stuff. And everybody that listens to the show probably knows how we feel about that. Like, it's just kind of, it doesn't mean very much. And you lose a lot of the messaging if you focus on the trivia. However, in the context of the show, especially with the fact that they're showing a new story every episode, a cute story too. They're very like, legends-esque, like heroic tales that are for kids, like bedtime stories. I like that. The fact that they're focusing on how many fingers the monster had and what color was the toy the alien was playing with, all of that, I can kind of shrug that off. It's not really a huge deal. It's a game and it's for kids.
It's hard to say, like, what was the moral of the story as a trivia thing. Because, like, it's timed and it's all that stuff, right? So
yeah, I was also going to add to that is that on the other side of it, you could look at it and say that a big part of Star Wars fandom is Star Wars trivia, and this is the way of passing it down to the next generation while adding a new element to it. So
yeah, and these stories have been written actually by Cavan Scott, which I love that he gets to have like kind of a writer role within this new piece in the universe, which is really cool.
And they have like really adorable animations, or they're not really, they're like, I guess you call them animations. They're like still, but they're really
they
well
kind of
done.
move a little bit.
I thought it was very endearing, very cute.
Yeah.
So,
and then I do want to do a shout out to both Ahmed Best and Mary Holland. Ahmed plays Master Kellerin Beck, and of course we have 83, and then the other droid, which is just a prop droid, but he is a good boy. LXR5.
Yeah. I really liked the interaction between all of them. They did a really good job, and you can tell Ahmed is like having such a blast. Such a blast. I actually watched the episode of the Star Wars show where like Ahmed and Mary were there talking about like their roles and talking about like what they did on set and like what worked and what didn't work. And I just kind of felt that watching the show, it was really cute. And also, Ahmed got to pick his own character name and got to be a part of the creation of his character and got to make his own lightsaber. So seeing him like standing on that set and like trying to like help these kids, it's really, it's heartwarming.
Yeah. And I love that they have a dark side temptation.
Yes.
I thought that was like such a really interesting ad. And if you don't know, like did you want to explain like the dark side temptation piece?
God, it's so cool. Yeah, this is the most interesting part of it by far. They had like a puzzle that is probably the hardest puzzle in the entire thing. It relies on your communication where you can't see each other. And one person has the solution and one person has to put it together. So they have to describe what the puzzle is, what it looks like in its completed state. And they have things like triangles. So these kids are saying it's on the right, it's on the left. And on a triangle, it's not very clear what's on the right and what's on the left until you put it down. So like they had a really hard time with it. And then there was a little triangle in the corner that would light up red with, which I know now is Sam Witwer's voice.
Yeah, I was like, as soon as it was like, come here and you can pass this trial. Yes. And I'm like, that's Sam Witwer. And Kyle, my husband, was like, oh my God. Like, because he knows that I hear voices, like the animation voices really easily because I've watched all the animation. Yeah. I'm like, Sam, yay! But it's really interesting what happens is that they go ahead to the next room. They skip ahead and then...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So...
like...
in the second episode, they actually chose the dark side. So this is so funny.
Go, ladies.
Yeah.
No. Like, when I watched it with my kids, like, my daughter was like, choose the dark side.
Choose the dark side. That's what I said. I was
dark side.
Like, why wouldn't you? Like, come on. But in the second episode, it was two girls that were doing it. And one of them, she kept saying, the one that was trying to instruct the other one, she was like, do you want to choose the dark side? Do you want to choose the dark side? Do you want to choose the dark side? Because it kept getting longer and longer. And she was like, we're going to lose. We're going to lose. Do you want to choose the dark side? Finally, she chose for her. She goes, we're choosing the dark side. Unfortunately, they had wasted way too much time just trying to figure that last one out and trying to decide whether or not to do the dark side, that they didn't end up finishing it. But in the next room, because the whole thing was that, like, the dark side, if you choose it, it's going to make it harder for you in the next challenge, but they didn't know how. And they go in the next room with all the plugs where they have to find out which plug fits where, and they have to plug them all in. And they had turned off the lights. And the dark side was still there. The voice, Sam's voice, was still there taunting them the whole time. What are you going to do if you can't see anything? And you're running out of time. You're not going to make it. You're not going to pass. Are you scared? Do you fear me? And like,
I wonder if that would be worse.
Oh, I know, right? This little girl's like, no. Just like, it's so good. And I have a feeling they're going to change some of the elements of that if they continue to do the show for a new group that have seen it. But yeah, it was interesting. It was really interesting how they used that element, because then if you do get through that room, if you plug them all in, the dark side then just goes away and leaves you alone. And I was like, nah. I don't think it's that easy. I don't know. Like, again, this is for kids. I can't be too hard on it for those themes. I think that they think it's a pretty good job, though, to kind of use that element in that way at all.
And that's tricky to do, personally.
It is.
I think it's very tricky.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And then they end up, like, basically racing to the end, and they have to help each other out, and there's a lot of kind of that teamwork element and encouraging each other throughout the whole show. And then at the end, if they make it to the end, they get to get their kyber crystals, and they get to make their lightsabers, which is, like, if you've gone to Galaxy's Edge and you've done the lightsaber making workshop, it's just kind of like this is like a very long version of what you do there.
Yeah.
But it's still cool, because then they get to turn on the lightsabers, and they're the, like, Force of X ones. And
yeah, they're really cool. Like, all the hilts, I think, are the same. But, of course, because the hilts are pieces that you get from completing some of the games. But when they put the light on at the end, and they have their, like, little Jedi robes. They're so little cute. Jedi robes. Yeah.
I know.
Just like,
they're like babies. They're all babies. And I know that, like, every adult Star Wars fan that's like, oh man, this would have been so cool as a kid. I honestly do think, like, it's very cool. I watched the first 2 episodes with my kids, and we just haven't watched the third one at the time that we're recording this one. And my son loved it. He was like bouncing and cheering and screaming and like crazy. And my daughter was like, what is this? Like, I don't, that's like not what she sounds like, but she's just like, this, you know. And
she's
and
so
then,
that
like,
age.
by the second game, she was actually, like, really into it and had a team she was cheering for, and really loved the trivia aspect of it. Like, that really, like, cinched it for all of us, I think. The trivia, because I really, I don't know, there was something about listening to the story and seeing the animation that was so very Star Wars.
Yes.
And they loved to see how the kids reacted when they didn't get it. And, like, we've watched a bunch of, like, kids competition shows, like Kids MasterChef Junior.
Yep.
And so it felt very similar to those things. My only challenge is that they don't seem to be interested in watching more, because it's always the same in their opinion. So it's not something I'm pushing for them to watch or anything like that. It's just maybe if they had more cycles of different things that each group would experience, it would be different every time. Kind of like how in a baking show challenge, like or like the baking show or MasterChef Junior, they have different things they have to make each week. And it's the same group. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. I was gonna bring up the whole like Legends of the Hidden Temple run that happened when I was a kid, and that was like I remember being so into that show. I was so into Legends of the Hidden Temple. They had like the blueberry kudas and the purple parrots and the golden monkeys. And like, I remember all of the teams. I'm sorry if I just butchered a few of them, but like it was, the green iguanas, like it was so much fun, like finding the team you're going to root for. And they did the same challenge. The first challenge for Legends of the Hidden Temple was always the same one, but it was such a thrill to watch which teams got past that first challenge. And then the second challenges were always a little different. The temple was pretty much the same every time, but they had different rooms that they would close off and they would open up other rooms. So you never really knew exactly which combination you were going to get. And you always watched people struggle putting together the golden monkey statue, which was literally just like 3 parts, like a puzzle piece thing. It's exactly the same every time, but I swear. And these kids watched it. They watched it at home, and then they go on the show and they mess it up, and you're just screaming at the TV like, you know what it looks like. Just put it together, So I wonder, I know that they took inspiration from that. I just don't know why they're not using some elements there.
Like to give it a little bit more of a random feel. I think the beginning challenge would have been fine to keep like as is, but then like different combinations of the middle path might have been interesting, because then it's like, what are they gonna get? Kyle's only comment was, they show who wins at the beginning in the in the intro.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, maybe that's not good. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're limited a lot because they can only work with like 3 teams. And I don't know, but I also think this is maybe another instance, again, where you're seeing them being very careful about things they may not need to be so careful about. And that's very frustrating. As someone who's a fan of Star Wars, it's like, okay, you could do this and you could do that. Why aren't you doing it? Like even with the limited budget, it has nothing to do with budget. It's just like, like just go back and watch those shows and just recreate some of the same stuff, but like Jedi themed. Like it's for kids. People are okay with it. It's fine.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting because I think we'll be able to see like the views on each episode. It would be interesting to see over the course of the whole run, like what is the drop off, or whatever, like, the attrition per episode. Not that I want it to like do badly. I want it to do great. I feel like my kids in particular were like super into it the first episode, and then like the second episode they're like, it's just the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing over and over again. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Aside from that, so that's like, I think that the whole dark side element was interesting, and I think that they're going to have to change it if they want people to make different decisions, or if they want it to be entertaining. They're going to see that. It's going to make it's it's going to be interesting. But
yeah, and this might just be the first season. If they do more, which I hope they do, I hope they add some elements of we as the audience don't know what the kids will face, because that's part of the why you come back.
Yeah, no, I agree. That'd be really cool.
Yeah. So this is just really interesting as a topic, because trials are such an important thing to Star Wars in many aspects, but also from a mythological perspective, from a Campbell perspective, as a lens to view the stories, especially mythology. These trials are like so fundamentally important to a hero or a heroine's journey that like they're actually just how they make up the journey.
Yeah.
It's literally like a key element of the story. But, I did want to kind of talk about the mythical way, trials from a mythic perspective, because I think it's important to like, let's talk through some of the ways that these come out, and then, talk about like how trials have appeared in the past and what we've seen kind of in, especially the, maybe a little bit in the Legends time, and then into what we're seeing from a trend perspective in the Disney era.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah. So from a Campbellian perspective and, you know, the lens that we kind of tend to have a starting point with, I guess, in most of our discussions, the initiation, the call to adventure, the crossing of the threshold, like all of these points in the journey, kind of start those trials. They kick off those trials, and all of the trials in that journey are based off of the socio and political circumstances, or of the elemental atmosphere that you're living in, depending on where you're at and whatnot. They all reflect that. So if you are someone who has lived on the edge of an ocean your entire life, you're probably going to have a trial where you're in a desert, right? Or if you grew up in the desert, you're probably going to have a trial at some point where you're surrounded by water. So that's just a very like simple way of kind of saying it, but trials are based around like what you know and what you don't know. So psychologically, like that means that it's just about experiencing things that you need to experience in order to kind of find certain balances within yourself, in order to, you know, Campbell says follow your bliss, but follow your bliss doesn't mean just to follow what you enjoy, what you like. It means to continue forward through your trials so that you can gather all of those things that you need in order to overcome certain things, to find your own path and your own destiny.
And in a mythic story, it's about gathering boons and allies and skills and things that you learn along the way that will help you resolve the end conflict. And I think that that's really, really important, because you might actually mess up a trial and end up hurt or end up not where you need to be from a, you know, success perspective, because you don't pass all your trials. Like that's I think really, really important. You don't always pass all your trials in a mythic story. Sometimes you fail and then you learn from it.
Failure at a certain trial is always it's usually at the point at the very bottom of the like journey. Usually it's the part at which you learn the most. And that, like I said, it's a very, very important. That's something that, like, kind of going back to the show, I thought they did pretty well. It was telling the kids, like, when they could not go on, when they failed, go back and continue learning. And just the language they decided to use there was just very important. And that was very
it gives
careful.
me, like, heartwarming glow. Like, oh yeah, don't worry, you're still on your journey.
You're still on your journey. I thought that was really great.
So I do want to point out, like, especially not like to pull in the OT, one of the major trials that Luke undergoes is the tree on Dagobah. And he goes into the cave, and then Yoda's like, that is why you fail. And like, that is one of the most important trials / experiences that Luke undergoes in the original trilogy. Everybody talks about this guy, like this particular setup. I think it happens almost halfway through Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, really? That makes sense.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because he's been training there for a while. We have the whole battle on Hoth. I'm going to have to look it up, but it is literally his failure in the cave that drives him towards his end success in Return of the Jedi, because he sees himself as Vader, and then he sees himself like his father in the end of Return of the Jedi by looking at his hand being a robotic hand and seeing that his father also had a robotic hand.
Yep, absolutely.
That's massively important. He picked up that knowledge from that failure. And you know?
Oh my God, I haven't. Okay, yeah. This is so funny because, like, last night I watched the last episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and, you know, that part with Luke deciding to leave Dagobah in order to go save his friends is very much paralleled in Avatar: The Last Airbender when Aang decides to leave the Guru to go save Katara. And what he does is he locks his chakra, right? Because he tries to go into the Avatar state. He gets hurt. His chakra is locked. And then the lion turtle at the very last episode unlocks the chakra for him, and that's how he learns how to take away bending, and that's how he defeats the Fire Lord. So it's like these kinds of things, like failure, what you learn through that failure, and not only what you learn through that failure, what you learn through the struggle to get back, right?
Yeah.
That's a big part of it, because that's where Luke got his robotic arm because when Vader chopped off his arm, he got the robotic arm. All of that journey back led him to that point. And
led him to the moment of true compassion towards his father, right? Even though his father was threatening everything that he loved.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like we can directly tie this back to Star Wars in so many ways. And, there are other versions of like trials out there from a mythic perspective. One of the biggest ones is the 12 labors of Hercules. Just like, if you don't know what they are, you can just go there. It's he was basically given these 12 labors to prove that he was worthy. And because he held the name Heracles, which was in honor of Hera, even though he, and these were all given to him by Hera as sort of punishment for the fact that if we want to talk about generational sin as a fact that Zeus had cheated on her with Hera's mother and created him as a demigod. So there's that generational sin that Heracles, or Hercules as some people call him, had to pay for to try to get past. And, Hercules has like a very tragic life in so many ways, but then ends up like becoming a god in the end.
Yeah.
Another version of trials, but from like a feminine perspective, is Psyche and Cupid. So after she accidentally burns Cupid and he leaves to go stay with his mother and recover, she is sent on a road of trials herself and different things that she has to do. And some of them are directly given to her by Aphrodite as punishment for kind of not living up to the standards of her son, I guess. Including sorting grades of rice. And because she had become friends with the ants, they help her, going down to the underworld and stealing, something from Persephone. Like she has these things that she has to do. And through it is the friends that she makes along the way, as well as the things that she has learned along the way that allows her to, become one with her mate, which was Cupid or Eros, and they are rewarded with both becoming gods and creating children out of that. That is the end. They enhance the pantheon by creating new gods to fill out the pantheon. And she is the other half of love is Psyche. Is your brain, because it's your heart and your soul, it's your heart and your soul. It's not just one or the other. In a relationship. And that's kind of like the point of those trials, is how does a mortal like prove her worth to, basically be of the same as a god, right? And it's like, that's kind of the point in a way. Like, you're trying to reach this transcendent space and you're not able to unless you can kind of gather all of the pieces of your own journey and your own puzzle. And the only way that you can do that is through experiencing life.
That's the overall metaphor for it. You
wanted to talk about
Janja?
Janja? Yeah, and also like the psychological aspects of like listening to story. But we'll get to that, I think. So do you want to talk about Janja?
So the like, for those who don't know, Janja is a kind of a genre in Asian story, specifically Chinese, where you have like these gods who have to cultivate enough power in order to become kind of like reach a certain status within the gods.
Yeah, like to ascend from being somebody who is sort of a disciple of refining themselves spiritually, you know, from a mortal plane to being like an immortal.
And you can even, like, as if you're like born a snake, you can ascend into becoming immortal from that, and then into becoming a god from being immortal. And it's funny because, like, in the Chinese dramas, it's always like, you were a snake. Da, da, da. You have the qualities of snake because you were a snake, you know, versus like you were a nine-tailed fox, therefore you're already very mythical and legendary, you know?
And some people are born as gods or immortals, right?
Yep.
And so they've kind of skipped a few steps, but it doesn't mean that they don't have to go through some sort of trial. And that's actually quite common, that as a reflection of them kind of passing on to the next stage or elevation, they would also get like some sort of immediate kind of backlash for kind of breaking the rules of the universe. Like, people are supposed to die. People are supposed to. So like, you know, some examples that we've seen in Chinese mythology, especially done in dramas, has been like they'll be struck by 27 lightning
I was
bolts.
gonna say the lightning thing is pretty consistent through a lot of the genre stuff. And like, what's really interesting is that it is a physical test, but it doesn't rely on you being strong physically. It relies on the amount of like spiritual energy and the cultivation and time. It's actually a lot to do with time, because a lot of the conflict when the lightning happens and whatnot, it's like, you haven't done enough. You haven't done enough training. You haven't done enough of this. It doesn't usually matter. It's just like, you have not been given enough time to prepare for this trial. And they're always worried about them, like, honestly getting struck so much that they will die, because even immortals cannot handle a certain amount of, and usually the lightning comes from high gods that even the gods don't know. They know they exist and they're out there, but they don't actually know them because they don't know what's on that next plane of existence.
Yeah.
And
because none of them have ever been there and they don't interact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that is a test from the ones that the gods don't even know, saying like, how dare you be so powerful? I'm going to test you to see like if you can get through this. It's so funny because it's like, we don't see that kind of stuff in like the West, like at all.
Like a universal backlash to becoming more powerful? No.
That's a meta statement. I love it in a like Ashes of Love. She gathers like they're kind of represented as like little spheres of spiritual energy. And that's kind of her cultivating enough in order to become more powerful. And she is punished for that many times, many different ways. The way that she accumulates it and whatnot, and her being sneaky to get it, or her cheating, or making deals or whatever. And but at the end of the day, it's not about, like you said, it's not about leveling up. Even though that's the literal interpretation of it, it's actually more about like what you're experiencing, what you're going through, and how you're using that. That's making you into your own person. That's what it's about.
I think that there's actually like a really good real life, you know, concept that we could apply what the trials are versus like when you've kind of succeeded past them. And it's, imagine like you're exercising or you're practicing a new skill, and you kind of feel like you're on this plateau for a while until you kind of suddenly feel like, I'm suddenly better.
It happens like in the blink of an eye.
Yeah. And so like the road of trials is like that you're on that plateau and you're still like going through what you need to particularly go through to learn what you need to learn until you do actually show that you are better at X. So like, especially exercising, people talk about this all the time, that you end up reaching these plateaus and you're like, it's so frustrating. But if you can make it through that, you can get to, you know, I can run further, I can run faster, I can, you know, have more stamina.
Yeah, I don't have to eat so much. I don't have to eat like all this. Yeah, I know. That's a very good analogy. Yeah, and like there's also in the Western context, an example would be like the knights, and how specifically how Campbell honestly tells the stories, like the Arthurian tales of the knights, is very interesting, because he talks about the trials and how all the knights had basically the same trials, kind of like how the Janja gods have very similar trials. They have to, and there's something
like they were kind of quests, right? Like you go and fight a bad guy, and you know, you go and save a maiden, and you go and do. Yeah.
So there's actually one I wanted to bring up, which is so bizarre, which was there was a trial that all the knights had to experience, which was that they go to a castle, they're very tired, they're invited in because they're a knight, you know, they're shown hospitality and whatnot, and they go into their bedroom, and when they go into the bedroom that they're given for that night, they still have their armor on and everything, and they lock the door behind them, and all that's in this room is a bed. And so the knight goes to lay on the bed. He can't take his armor off. He's so exhausted. He goes to lay on the bed, and the bed starts bucking. And he's like trying to hold the bed down, but the bed keeps bucking him off of it, and his armor and everything, you know? And he's like, I just want to go to sleep, right? And this happens for the entire night. He cannot sleep. He can't get out of the room. He can't get out of this armor. He can't go to, he can't just have a night's rest. And the next morning, the women come into the room. He lasted the night. He just went through it. He didn't he wasn't at harm of like getting killed or anything by the bed. He just couldn't go to sleep. The women come in and they help him take his armor off. They give him a warm bath. They provide him some clean clothes, and they send him on his way. And that's the trial. Isn't that funny? I was like, the way Campbell tells it, I obviously butcher it, but it's really funny because Campbell's whole, you know, he always is leading up to something. This doesn't lead to anything. This isn't like, it doesn't have a message other than Campbell will interpret it in a way to say that the bed is the feminine, and he will say it's like how, you know, men lying with women is something to do with that. It's something to do with being patient with a woman. I don't know, but it's certainly.
I was
funny.
like, is it one of those weird hotel? Like, it's a shifty hotel where they had like a vibrating fan.
Dude, I can't believe that was a thing. It's so bizarre.
It was just a little broken, like
yeah. But yeah, so they don't always have to mean something incredible. Basically, is what I'm saying, because a lot of those knights, the whole point is just to test because knights were expected to be chivalrous, and chivalry was a very strange thing. It's not just about being strong and powerful and, you know, smart. It's also about having patience, especially with women, you know, because interactions with women as a knight in the mythical tales are very important. So, yeah, so I can see, you know, there is a message underlying there, but it doesn't always have to be like so epic and so, you know, big.
Yeah, you're not always fighting dragons. Sometimes you are
fighting a bed, just trying to go to sleep.
Fighting a bed. Yeah, you're trying to go to sleep, or you know, you're dealing with an old woman on the road.
Yes, very much, yes.
Because that could be the goddess in disguise, the hag, right? So, yeah, like it's not always clear exactly what the person will face, but it's supposed to align to, like, just from a story perspective, what the hero needs to learn and overcome or fail at to have enough of the pieces of the puzzle to solve the problem, transcend, and bring the elixir back. That's the point.
Yeah.
I do want to just like point out one modern storyteller's version of Trials that I really, really love, which is Tamora Pierce does Trials so well. So her Linus Rampant series, which if you haven't read, they're young adult books that were done in the 80s, early 90s. They've been around my whole life, it feels like, but I read them when I was much younger, and then again as an adult, and they still qualify as so fundamental to my understanding of story. She has to become a knight. Alana goes into, and the kingdom itself is magical. She goes into like she's bathed. She has to stay up all night, and then she has to face this like very psychological trial inside of this like sort of sacred room that all knights have to go through, and it tests them individually with a bunch of tests. And that's like, you know, that we're going to get into tests versus trials in a little bit. But instead of saying, hey, you just passed, which she does, it says, now you have a quest based on this. You have to fix this particular problem. And it sends her on like a road of trials past that. So it wasn't just the psychological, like this is what you have to face for your own psychology. Now you also have to heal the world on top of it. And I absolutely love that version of it, because she goes through trials, etc., her whole journey. But this one in particular is like so good, and it happens halfway through her quartet, etc. And it's just really, really good. I just love it. So
yeah, I love that. Again, and we talked about this a little bit right before we started recording. Tamora Pierce is a good example of these mythological things happening from a very feminine perspective, and something that's impacted a lot of people, I think. So it's very cool.
Yeah, if you're looking for a cool book series that has been around forever, but is still there, Tamora Pierce's books on Trebond and that world are, or sorry, not Trebond. I'm trying to remember the world. Her books set in that world are just awesome.
Yeah.
So many different examples of different types of women too. And that to me is very important. So it's not just the women who want to be knights. It's also the women who want to be thieves. It's also, thieves. It's also the women who want to be, shape-shifting, animal morphing people. Like it has a lot going for it.
Yeah.
But all of them, reflect failure and frustration and are very real. And I love it.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Okay, so we did want to talk about, kind of like trials from a Legends perspective, because Chris Terrio, who wrote The Rise of Skywalker with J.J. Abrams, referenced these a lot in the Rise of Skywalker documentary. And I just I think it's important to acknowledge like these existed, and now like it seems like they are trying to make things more about the three pieces from Jedi Temple Challenge that they're trying to acknowledge. It's not necessarily kind of these tests, and I think that that's a really important thing, because it feels like there's a difference between a trial and a test, and trials. Do you want to go into the Legends pieces?
Oh Lord. Okay. Sure. So I mean, obviously, like, neither of us know a ton about this. There's been a lot of conversation about it from other people that we know who are very much more familiar with Legends, like Jesse. But the Legends trials that I know enough from like wiki and whatnot were skill, courage, flesh, spirit, and insight. And I think that these were handled pretty well in the Legends from what I can tell. Like it's all very interesting. It kind of all builds off of very limited information within the original films, as well as in the second trilogy in the prequels, which was, you know, basically just saying, like, you're ready for your Jedi trials and that sort of thing. And then the writers of the Legends books just built upon that and said, okay, well, what if we actually put these Jedi through these things in order to be tested in very specific ways? And a lot of people will interpret, like, Anakin's Jedi trials, like Luke's Jedi trials, like when they got their arm cut off, that will be a trial of the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand that. That's, like, very, like, strange to me, because it's like, well, what do you learn?
That you must lose a hand. Yeah,
it's very odd. And I know, like, maybe that's not the only way it can be interpreted, but that is the way that it is in those main examples, which are the main examples. So it's very strange, but I do like the way that, because we have people like Terrio and we have, like, Soul, who is also, you know, very inspired by, like, Legends materials, this does bleed into the canon that we have now, and it does affect it in a certain way. And what they decided to do with Jedi Temple Challenge was they decided to have 3 things, which were knowledge, bravery, and strength.
Mm-hmm.
And those things combine those previous ideas in a much more realistic way, I think. It's much more broad. I don't know how I feel about it yet, but I understand what they're going for, I guess.
Just one sec. I'm looking for the actual part of the Jedi Codex. Just one sec.
Mm-hmm.
I don't actually think that there is. Interesting.
Oh, in the book, in the new book about the Jedi?
No, in the old one.
Oh, okay. Is there anything about the trials in the Jedi book where it's like,
no.
Interesting.
Like from Luke's perspective, no.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. That's really weird, actually. It's very strange. Because that book was made between Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. Yeah,
so interestingly enough, like the 3 pillars of the Jedi are force, knowledge, and self-discipline in that old Jedi book. Mm-hmm. So kind of, you know, like 3s are really important in Star Wars. It's interesting that they used to have 5, but like even in this book, they don't actually mention like the different trials that people have to go through, other than to say that people have passed the trials to become a knight. I do want to talk about like the trial that Kanan overcame, because I think that that's the only version of a knight's trial that we actually see in canon. So Kanan and Ezra are going to a temple on Lothal because they're trying to find out more information, and Ezra is going in and is trying to find basically a kyber crystal, and so he is off on his own thing, and that's like, you know, very much a Padawan step in the journey, and we've seen that reflected in Clone Wars as well as now Rebels. You are faced with kind of, you know, this very psychological thing, which is like the thing that you think you should use is not the thing that you need to use. It's like the thing that you're most uncomfortable with is what you need to use.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, if you're not good at patience, you need to be patient. Things like that. Yeah. And at the same time, and maybe this is a different time period, I'm trying to remember. I think it actually happens later when they go back. Ezra is talking to Yoda. Ahsoka is meditating. Ahsoka is with them this time, and then Kanan is off and actually fights the Grand Inquisitor from the first season, but when he was still a Jedi Temple guard. Mm-hmm. And so they use the same voice actor again, and he basically challenges him verbally as well as physically with the lightsaber, and they fight. Literally, they have like a lightsaber duel, and then he realizes that his goal is to let Ezra go and follow his own path, and that's the best thing that he can do as a mentor, and that is him passing the trial. Mm-hmm. is like the wisdom to know that you can't fear failure in teaching somebody else.
Yeah.
And then the Jedi Temple Guard who is the Grand Inquisitor, and I do not remember his name. I'm sure he's got a name, but he actually says kneel, and he actually knights him. But it's all like in this mystical kind of semi elsewhere, because they're all in the temple, but like they aren't.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. I like that.
Yeah, and so it's just, to me, it's kind of like his final test, maybe. But it was about him realizing something about himself. And I think,
that's what a lot of them are. Like, and like you said, like if you're this kind of person, you need to experience kind of the opposite of what that is. You need to prove yourself as being adaptable and able to represent the people that you're trying to save, I think is a big part of that, right? I don't know. I'm like kind of realizing some things about some other media, actually, like while you just said that, because I'm like, oh my God, there's so many like parallels with that. And there's so many interesting ways to like use that when you can kind of think about story. And
yeah. And I do want to point out like that Mace Windu tries to convince Ahsoka in the Clone Wars when she goes through Jedi, like when she's basically on the run, right? Because she's been falsely accused of committing a murder and things like that. That Mace tries to use that as, and I do not agree with it.
No.
Because I think that like the Jedi were like, well, you know, sometimes people go through terrible things and we don't want to put them through more things. Because like literally that's what happened to Obi-Wan Kenobi. He went through, you know, the Phantom Menace, the whole thing. Qui-Gon died and he killed, quote unquote, cut
in half. Yeah.
cut Darth Maul in half, thought he killed him in an effort to save everybody from Darth Maul, and Yoda knights him. Like that's what happens to Obi-Wan. He didn't have to go through trials, even though Qui-Gon felt like he was ready for them.
This is literally just like another example of why the Jedi are wrong, like for the most part, because
because the trials are artificial. Right? That's the problem, is that they really needed to be, so the Force gave Kanan his trial. Yeah, Yoda was hanging out in the wings talking to Ezra about life, the universe, and everything in the world between worlds, but the Force gave Kanan this vision of the Temple Guard who tried him. Like, you know, it was literally like trials from a perspective is like, are you worthy to step forward? And really, like, you're the only one who can answer that question. And that's the point.
Yeah.
Right? It's only finding something within yourself that you can pull out and say, yes, no, I'm ready to stop being on this plateau and, you know, ascend from a cultivation perspective. Right? To mix the two, you know, genres of storytelling a little bit.
Well, that's...
And to say like, oh, you need to literally lose your arm to pass, you know, this test of flesh or trial of flesh. Like, I don't know. It's something that you find in you.
Yes. There's actually, you know, like in genre dramas, there's like no really loss of limbs. Like they get beat up to the point where they like spit blood on their beautiful costumes.
Yeah. And that's, you know, somebody's actually serious when that happens.
Yes, that's actually like your fear for them. Like, but yeah, they don't have that. And so it's really interesting when, you know, going back to before I even knew about this kind of stuff, when people said, oh, well, Rey didn't even lose an arm. Like, who cares? Like, honestly, like, it doesn't make it Star Wars. Like, Star Wars is not, it's about the message that comes from that. It's not about the actual act of that happening. That does not need to happen literally. It needs to happen figuratively. And I think that for Rey, a lot of things like that happened figuratively, you know? She went through
very much.
She went through the ringer on that kind of stuff to use Charles Soule's his little phrase there. Put them through the ringer. I haven't heard that one in so long. But yeah, so I don't know. That whole thing is interesting. Going back to Ahsoka's thing and about how, like, the Jedi were trying to say in that moment, like, well, you've
this must have been your trial because, we don't make mistakes. Yeah, that's the point, right? Yeah.
We've actually decided that our mistake is your Jedi trial. That's, I mean, it's obvious what that is.
It's supposed to come off. It is supposed to come off that way. Yeah. That is very intentional. That was showing the failure of the Jedi, like that. And then the new Clone Wars episodes that we've gotten with her, like really putting a focus on Ahsoka's way of viewing people, especially being important, is fundamental to what the Jedi were supposed to be doing. But they got caught up in their dogma and in their practices and in their ritual, right? And ritual in and of itself is not a bad thing. And I about a year ago, I spoke with Kevin Scott actually about the Jedi and the rituals and the dogmatic nature to do with Dooku Jedi Lost. Yeah. And one of my favorite things about that conversation is that when you lose connection to the ritual that you maintain, i.e. it stops being refreshed for a new generation, then it becomes stale and dogmatic.
Yes.
And that's the point, is that that's where the Jedi are at the twilight of the Republic, as people like to call it, rather than, and I think what we'll see during the High Republic is a less dogmatic and more connected to the Force version of the Jedi in the High Republic. Yeah. I honestly think that that's where they're going to go.
Yeah. It's kind of inevitable from everything that they've said at this point and everything that Kevin has talked about. Yeah, I trust that a lot more than I had before, honestly.
Especially the concept of Knights of the Republic. That is what they are going for. They're going for these very heroic figures, much like the other knights that we've spoken about in our conversation, the Knights of the Round Table. And it definitely feels that way. And then they're also fighting kind of the Nile, for lack of a term, barbarian hordes that are invading the Republic.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they call them space Vikings, which, if you're talking about knights and Vikings, you're talking about a very specific period of time in British history, by which you had the Saxons versus the Anglos.
Yeah.
And
I hope that there is a bigger monster for them to defeat together, and that becomes kind of the big realization.
That they're not separate?
That the whatever they are, the nihilists, whatever they are, that the Jedi fear them so much, but they should actually fear this other thing that that other group also fears. They find a common enemy, maybe it's some kind of form of some darkness.
Are you looking for some sort of balance in the Star Wars universe?
No. Yes, of course I am. Oh, yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for. No, cool. I love those kinds of stories, honestly. I absolutely adore those kinds of stories where the enemy you thought that was your enemy is actually not your enemy. They're just someone that is dealing with a problem differently than you are. And I love that.
Yeah, I think that would be a very interesting way to take, they framed them as bad guys, but they honestly just all seem like punk rockers, anarchists. They all seem like tragic heroes. It seems like this very Hamlet way of looking at a bad guy. It's the nihilism thing. It gets into my head, and it's been nesting there ever since I heard about it. And I was like, this could be really interesting if they are not the actual bad guys. There is a bigger twist on the horizon. There is a bigger threat on the horizon. I would find that very interesting. I think that if they're going to do it right, and to your point, what you're saying, because this is all just us speculating, we don't know anything about this stuff. I think it would be really, really cool if we got, some conflicts between them, because it has to feel real and earned that they do not agree on a very fundamental level. But then there's some crossover of conversation or trying to find common ground, etc. But it failing, and then they see the bigger threat or the different threat, because threes are very important, and we talk about this a lot.
Good
which
point.
is we think we have one side and we think we have another, but there's actually a third way. Yeah. Like that's, you know, the middle way in a you know, Alan Watts kind of way, because you can never have one thing or the other.
I love those stories. I love those stories because it means so much. It's like on this other level where it's beyond an individual story. This is about the universe is at stake. And if this group of people and this group of people don't come together to fix it, then like everyone's going to, you know, no longer exists if the stakes are that high, which is really cool.
Yeah, so that's what I would like to see. But I also think that from a trial perspective in the future, we're going to see more of those. What would they be called in the military? It'd be like, you know, battle promotions, you know, like that's kind of what the Jedi are going for. Like, this was actually your trial. Like you're promoted because you've gone through so much. You know, you're in the military and you're like on the field and it's like, now I need you to be a captain. Now you're a knight because you've been through so much. I think we'll see a lot more of those things because of people going through things, and it will be framed better than what Mace said.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll be less like militaristic and it'll be more of a monk type of thing, like how Cavan wrote in Dooku Jedi Lost. Like it's very much more of ritual with meaning. We're here because we're learning a truth about ourselves. We're learning about history. We're learning about you know, like the mystical aspects of it, like the magic aspects of it and whatnot. I really think that's got a place in Star Wars. There's no way they're just going to put it in that one book and then toss it to the wayside, you know? Like that. No,
especially like Cavan and Claudia worked so closely together to make Master and Apprentice and Dooku Jedi Lost like work.
Yes.
Like as
that's true,
as companions and friends, and actually there's like overlap in the story between the two. So I think we will get more of that because they are two of the people that are working on the High Republic. And I'm excited. I don't know. I'm a sucker. My bar for Star Wars is so low. Like, just tell me a good story and have it mean something.
Give me lightsabers and stakes and good characters. It's great.
And relationships. Because I want struggle and I want characters who have, you know, flaws and they're trying to overcome them and they're trying to understand and they're trying to get through stuff. And the trials are not always external. Sometimes they're internal, and that's very, very important.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a thing I wanted to add about that in terms of trials. My dog will stop barking. Is that, you know, something to be reassured about, like going through trials, like as a young person that actually goes through them in real life, not just in the story, is that there is an exponential growth, like with how you learn everything that the generation prior to you has passed down, whether it's through, you know, books or through like conversation, through, you know, that sort of messaging.
The lessons learned from
through story, through story a lot of the time. And actually this is that is the most important way to communicate it. And what's so funny, like psychologically, is that every new generation has the ability for more capacity than the previous one. Like that's just how it is, and it's almost unexplainable. But you know, basic math has become, you know, everyone's expected to understand algebra.
Yeah,
and that's how
at an earlier age. Like my daughter learned algebra at an earlier age than I did.
Yeah, and that's expected, and it's doable. But there is an exponential growth that happens in every generation.
We as humans also collect the knowledge of the previous generation and hopefully learn from it. And it is a little bit of a wave pool, right? So we learn a little bit and then we go down a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like the universe claps us back, all of us. Especially from a societal perspective, there is backlash to how we improve as a culture and as a society. There is it is kind of like a wave pool as we're trying to get things right from a cultural perspective. There will be people that are like, no, brakes, burp. And it becomes it can become very hard and nasty from a humanistic perspective to change and transform. But the thing is, like, you got to keep on going. You got to keep on trying. There was a really interesting, I wrote this down and I do not remember who said it, but it was a minister who was speaking about Black Lives Matter, and he was talking about the civil rights movement, and because he was involved in the original civil rights movement, and it's like, it's got to be frustrating, like, you went through this, you know, and he's like, well, we failed.
Yeah.
Like, don't you see that? Like, we failed and we didn't make a change. And by the way, this podcast is like Black Lives Matter. Like, yeah. So if you don't agree, stop listening, or listen more and learn something.
But yeah, they didn't learn. The lesson was not learned, and the trial needs to happen.
The lesson was not learned, and the problem is that people are like, well, didn't we already fix that? No, you're always going to, you know, have to try again. But your goal is not to necessarily succeed. Your goal is to fail better. Yeah.
I love that way of putting it. I was gonna say.
He said that, and like, I love it, because it's never gonna be perfect, but all we can do, like all we can do is try to get closer. Like, one step in front of the other. You know, it's all we can do as humanity. It's all we can do, you know, for ourselves, is one step in front of the other, is try again and fail better.
Yeah, I like that. Fail better. There's the Campbell was all about the, you know, working on yourself is the best gift that you can give society, period. Trying to be better as an individual is giving back to society. It's like, it's a good minimum to strive for, I think. Yeah. And then, you know, you have the ability, once you're like, hey, I'm at this level, I'm at this plateau, and I'm still working on it, but what can I do for the people around me? That compassion, you know, seek joy, create things that mean things to other people, like give them joy. That's how we share the lessons that we learn from ourselves. Yeah, definitely. This is an awesome episode, Ty. Yeah, this was an interesting one. Yeah, and it's something that, like, we struggle with talking about, because it's not something that Star Wars has ever really tried to define until this moment. No. Like, in the Disney era. And I think, like, the trials that they've chosen for Jedi Temple Challenge have been really, really good. And I definitely give it a watch, especially if you have kids. I think it is enjoyable. I think my son is still more interested in watching again, and he's 8 versus the 12-year-old, so could be the difference. Yes. But we tend to watch stuff as a family like this, and then we talk about it and cheer for teams and all that stuff, and that's fun. I love that. It's good to hear that Will enjoys it. That makes me happy. I don't expect, you know, Robin to be so into it, because she's like right at that age now. She's like, I don't care. I love it. It's so fun. I love it. I think it's great. But I enjoy all of these phases, because it's like, you're so cute. I love it. I love that you're at this age. This is the age that you're at. Isn't that cool? And I want to tell her all about it. And, you know, some of the most annoying things, I'm like, the entire history of humanity has gone through what you've gone through. It's like stuff like that. I'm such an annoying mom. I was saying, no kid wants to hear that. Yeah, I know. I'm like, you think you're unique? You're actually just one of many humans that has gone through this. Yeah. But your perspective on it is unique, and that's what's important, because it will end up being your own decisions and your own path. And I must be the most annoying mom. You're doing what you can. You're doing the best you can do. I think that's great. Yeah, it's awesome. I am looking forward to seeing what we will see in the next little while. But thanks for hanging out with us. Ty, where can people find you if they are looking for you online? You can find me on Twitter at wit_folly. They can also find me on Twitter at my personal, which is black_TYM, and on YouTube at wit and folly. Awesome. Thanks for coming out. Cheers. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is the What the Force theme, orchestral music by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We would like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force. Brad, Cheryl Bell, Melody, Night Huntress in Wild Space, Susan, Felicia, How Rude, Anna Perez, Macau Mum, Neil, and James. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other podcast apps. It helps others find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or our website, whattheforce.ca, or on our new Discord. The links are in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.